"You already know it's your brother," my father said, sliding the papers across the table without even looking at me. My mother didn't say a word, she just nodded. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't being asked, I was being replaced. But 48 hours later, the lawyer said my name instead of his. My name is Hannah Mitchell. I'm 35, and I've spent most of my life learning how to take a step back so someone else could stand in front. I work in corporate operations, a steady job that keeps me busy enough to avoid thinking too much about the parts of my life that never really balanced out. From the outside, I probably look like I've built something stable and independent, and I have. But emotionally, there's always been a quiet gap in my family where I was supposed to feel equally valued and just never did. Growing up, it was always my younger brother who needed more, who was given more, who was excused more. If I succeeded, it was expected. If he struggled, it was urgent. I learned early that family decisions didn't require fairness. They required convenience. And somehow, I always ended up on the side that required patience, understanding, and silence. By the time I became an adult, I stopped fighting it. Not because I agreed, but because I realized arguing didn't change outcomes. It just made me the difficult one. So I built my own life quietly, kept my distance where I needed to, and told myself that peace sometimes meant accepting less attention rather than demanding more fairness. But nothing really prepares you for the moment your own family finally says out loud what you've only felt for years, that you were never the first choice. If you've ever sat in a room and realized the decision was already made about you before you even walked in, then you know that feeling doesn't come with noise. It comes with silence. Stay with me, because what happened after that meeting didn't just confirm what I suspected. It completely changed who they thought I was in their story. The meeting happened on a Thursday evening, the kind of family gathering that pretends to be casual but never really is. My parents had asked me and my brother, Ethan, to come over just to talk about future plans. I already had a feeling something was coming, but I still showed up because that's what I always did: show up, listen, adjust. We sat in the living room, the same place where most of my life's important decisions had been quietly redirected. My father didn't waste time with small talk. He leaned forward slightly, papers already arranged neatly in front of him. "We've made a decision," he said, like the conversation had already started long before I arrived. My mother stayed silent, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Ethan, on the other hand, looked calm, too calm, like he already knew the outcome. My father cleared his throat. "The opportunity we discussed, the partnership stake, it makes more sense for Ethan to take it forward." For a second, I didn't react. I just looked at him, waiting for the rest of the explanation. But there wasn't one. Ethan nodded slightly, like it was expected. "It's a big responsibility," he said, not even looking at me. "I'll handle it." I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "So that's it?" I asked quietly. "No discussion, no consideration." My father finally looked at me, but his expression didn't change. "Hannah, you're stable where you are. Ethan needs this more." That sentence hit harder than I expected, not because it was loud, but because it was familiar. I had heard versions of it my entire life. My mother finally spoke, softly but firmly. "You'll understand later. This is what's best for the family." Best for the family. Not equal, not fair, just decided. I glanced at Ethan. He still wasn't looking at me directly. And that's when I realized something. Not just that I had been left out of the decision, but that they had already agreed on it before I even walked into the room. So I nodded slowly, like I accepted it, even though something inside me had already stopped arguing. "Okay," I said simply. But as I stood up to leave the room, I noticed something I hadn't before. No one asked me to stay. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just another one of those family decisions where I ended up on the outside. I went back to work the next day, answered emails, attended meetings, and acted like nothing had changed. But something had changed, because now I couldn't unsee the pattern I had lived with for years. It wasn't just that Ethan was chosen. It was how automatic it felt to everyone else, like there had never been another option worth discussing. Over the next few days, I started noticing the way conversations shifted when I entered a room. Topics that were lively before suddenly became brief. Plans were mentioned in fragments, then stopped completely when I walked in. Even Ethan seemed different, more confident, more present in family discussions, like he had stepped into a role that had been prepared for him long before it was announced. I told myself not to overthink it, but then small things started stacking up. A shared email thread I wasn't included in. A follow-up meeting scheduled without my name on it. A comment from my mother like, "Ethan will handle that side of things now," said so casually, it almost felt normal. Almost. The worst part wasn't even the decision itself anymore. It was how quickly I had been moved out of it without resistance from anyone else. No hesitation. No second opinions. Just alignment, like they had all been waiting for me to accept it quietly. One evening, I stayed late at work longer than usual just to avoid going home immediately. When I finally did, I sat in my car for a while, watching the house lights through the window, realizing something I had avoided thinking about for a long time. I wasn't just being overlooked in moments like this. I was being positioned that way. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that this wasn't a single decision. It was a system I had been part of without ever being asked if I agreed to it. It started with a name I didn't expect to see again, our family attorney, Mr. Calder. He had always been a background figure in our lives, the kind of person who only appeared during formal signatures or routine updates. My parents insisted were normal. But after the meeting, I found an old email buried in my archived folder from months ago, something I must have overlooked at the time. It mentioned a secondary authorization structure tied to the family's financial arrangements, and my name was listed there alongside Ethan's, but with a designation I didn't remember agreeing to. At first, I assumed it was just legal wording, something symbolic or outdated. But the more I read, the more it didn't feel accidental. There were references to oversight rights, fallback authority, and conditions I had supposedly acknowledged in earlier documentation. I tried to remember signing anything like that, but nothing came to mind clearly, just fragments of conversations where I was told, "Don't worry, it's just standard family planning." That phrase suddenly felt different. Later that night, I called Mr. Calder's office under the excuse of needing clarification on something unrelated. I didn't expect him to take the call personally, but he did. His tone was careful, almost measured, like he already knew why I was really reaching out. "Hannah," he said after a pause, "I was wondering when you'd ask about that." My grip tightened on the phone. "Ask about what exactly?" There was a brief silence on the line before he responded. "The structure your father insisted remain confidential until a triggering event occurred." Triggering event. I repeated it in my head long after the call ended. It didn't sound like family planning anymore. It sounded like preparation. And for the first time, I started wondering if what happened in that living room wasn't the end of my role in the family, but the moment something in it was finally set in motion. I met Mr. Calder in person the next morning. The office felt quieter than I expected, almost intentionally neutral, like nothing in the room was allowed to suggest emotion or bias. He greeted me the same way he always had, polite, controlled. But there was a difference in his expression this time, like he had been waiting for this conversation for a long while. "I assume you've reviewed the email," he said as I sat down. "I did," I replied, "but it doesn't make sense. My name is on documents I never agreed to, and I need to understand why." He nodded slowly, as if that was exactly the question he expected first. "Let's clarify something," he said, opening a thin file in front of him. "Your involvement in the family structure was never informal. It was legally integrated years ago under your father's direction." I frowned. Years ago, I was never told. "That is correct," he said calmly. "You were not informed at the time." The words sat heavily between us. He slid a document toward me, not rushing. "Your father structured certain contingencies into the family estate and business arrangements. Ethan was positioned as the primary operator. You were designated as the secondary authority, activated only under specific conditions." My eyes scanned the page, but my mind kept stopping on one thing. Secondary authority. Not erased, not removed, just inactive. So what changed? I asked. Mr. Calder looked at me directly. Your father believed those conditions may now be in motion. A pause followed that felt longer than it should have. In motion because of the decision they made, I asked quietly. He didn't confirm it immediately, but he didn't deny it either. The timing is aligned, he said carefully. That was enough. I leaned back slightly, trying to process what he was really saying. So Ethan being chosen wasn't just a family decision, I said. It activated something. Mr. Calder closed the file gently. It may have. For the first time, I felt something shift, not confusion anymore, but direction. Like I wasn't just reacting to what they had done. I was standing inside something that had already been built long before any of us spoke about it out loud. And as I left his office, I realized the worst part wasn't that I had been overlooked. It was that I might have been positioned there on purpose. I didn't go home right away after leaving Mr. Calder's office. I sat in my car for a long time, just staring at the steering wheel, replaying everything he said in my head. Secondary authority, activated conditions, my father's instructions. None of it felt like a normal family arrangement anymore. It felt like a system I had been unknowingly placed inside, one that only made sense now that something had triggered it. When I finally checked my phone, I saw messages from my mother and Ethan. At first, they were casual updates about next steps, discussions about the opportunity, small comments like I was still part of the conversation in the usual way. But something about the tone felt slightly different now, more certain, like they believed everything had already been settled and there was no reason to revisit it. Ethan's message was the clearest. Everything's moving forward as planned. Dad would have agreed with this. That line made my grip tighten around the phone, not because it surprised me, but because it assumed agreement where I knew there had never been any conversation with me at all. I finally responded with one short message. I met with Mr. Calder. The reply came faster than I expected. Why would you do that? Not concern, not curiosity, just resistance. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I noticed something else, silence from my mother. No follow-up, no clarification, just nothing. And that silence told me more than the messages did. Because if this was just a simple family decision, they wouldn't be reacting like this. Later that evening, I received another call from Mr. Calder. His tone was different this time, more direct. Hannah, he said, you need to be prepared. If the conditions are officially recognized, your role won't remain theoretical. I sat up straighter. What does that mean? There was a pause before he answered. It means your family's version of events may not survive the next stage of disclosure. I felt my stomach tighten. Outside, the sky had gone dark, but I stayed in the car anyway, staring forward as if something was about to arrive. Because for the first time since this started, I realized the truth wasn't something I was uncovering slowly anymore. It was something that was about to be revealed all at once, and I was no longer on the outside of it. The next morning, I got the call I didn't expect, but somehow knew was coming. Mr. Calder's voice was sharper this time, more final. Hannah, you need to come in immediately. Your presence has been formally requested for the execution review. I didn't even ask what it meant anymore. I just said I was on my way. When I arrived, the office wasn't just quiet. It felt staged, like something had already been arranged before I walked through the door. My mother and Ethan were already there. That alone told me everything. They looked comfortable at first, like they were there for confirmation, not conflict. Ethan even gave me a small nod, like I was late to something already decided. This is unnecessary, my mother said immediately as I entered. We already agreed on the distribution and roles. Mr. Calder didn't respond right away. Instead, he placed a sealed document on the table between us. Nothing has been finalized yet, he said calmly. That is why we are here. Ethan leaned forward. What do you mean not finalized? Dad made his intentions clear. I was chosen. My mother nodded quickly. Exactly. This shouldn't be reopened. That's when Mr. Calder finally looked at both of them. Your father anticipated this interpretation, he said, which is why he structured the agreement with conditional authority activation. The room shifted instantly. Frowned. Conditional what? Mr. turned slightly toward me. Is not secondary in the way you've assumed, he said carefully. She is the controlling authority under activation conditions that have now been met. Silence hit the room so fast it felt physical. My mother blinked. That's not possible. It is documented, Mr. replied simply. Let out a short laugh, but it cracked halfway through. No, that's not. Dad wouldn't do that. He told me. He said I was handling everything. Mr. slid the document forward. He told you what was active at the time, not what was contingent. I looked down at the paper in front of me, my name printed in a way I had never seen before, not as a passive participant, but as the central authority tied to execution rights, financial oversight, and final approval control. And suddenly the pattern made sense. The exclusion, the confidence, the way they had moved forward without hesitation. They didn't just choose. They assumed I no longer mattered. But the truth was, they had been building everything around a decision they were never fully in control of. My mother finally spoke again, but her voice had changed. She said, softer now, "This doesn't need to become something bigger than family." I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was being asked to accept something. I felt like I was being acknowledged for something they had tried not to see. I didn't make it bigger, I said quietly. Then I turned too. You did, I added. The room went completely still. And as Mr. opened the final section of the document, I realized this wasn't about choosing sides anymore. It was about revealing who had actually been holding the authority the entire time. For a moment after the document was fully revealed, no one spoke. It was as if the room itself didn't know how to move forward. Stared at the papers like they might change if he looked long enough, while my mother kept shifting her gaze between me and Mr., searching for a version of this situation that still made sense in the world she thought she understood. Mr. closed the folder gently, but his voice stayed firm. At this point, he said, the activation conditions are officially recognized. Mitchell holds the controlling authority as outlined in the estate and business structure. Finally broke the silence. So what now? He asked, but his voice wasn't confident anymore. It was uncertain, like someone realizing the ground they were standing on had already moved. My mother stepped forward slightly. She said carefully, almost pleading now, "This doesn't have to change our family." I looked at her for a long moment, but I didn't feel the same weight in her words anymore. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood how long my place in the family had been conditional, depending on whether I was needed or convenient. I didn't change anything, I said quietly. I just stopped being invisible in the system you were using without me. That landed differently. Looked down, running a hand through his hair, frustration mixing with disbelief. This is insane, he muttered, but there was no fight left behind it. Mr. stood, signaling the end of the formal part of the meeting. From this point forward, he said, any decisions related to the structure require authorization. The weight of that sentence didn't feel dramatic, it just felt final. As I gathered my things, my mother reached out slightly like she might say something else, but stopped herself. For the first time, there was no argument left to win, no version of events they could reset to. I walked out of the office into the hallway alone, but not the same way I had walked in. Something had shifted, not in what I had, but in what I was allowed to see clearly now. And as the door closed behind me, I realized the story they had been telling for years had only worked because I was never supposed to know I was part of the structure holding it up. Standing outside that office, I kept thinking about how easily a life can look decided when you're only seeing one side of it. For years, I believed I was simply the one left out of things, when in reality, I was part of something I was never shown the full shape of. If you've ever felt like your place in a family or situation was already written without you, then you know how unsettling it is when the truth finally shifts. So I want to ask you, Have you ever discovered that being chosen or not chosen was never really the full story? Because what I just found out didn't just change my role in my family. It changed the entire way I understood how decisions were being made around me all along. I didn't get all the answers that day, but I finally understood something I had ignored for years. Being overlooked isn't always an ending. Sometimes it's just the part of the story you were never meant to see until the right moment. And if you've been following this journey, you already know this wasn't just about inheritance or authority. It was about realizing how much of your life has been decided in rooms you were never invited into. If you want to see what I do next now that everything has shifted, stay with me, because this story is far from over, and the next move changes everything again.